so, but then I always thought, well, that was the lesson, is that you pass this way but one. And so since then, I've always done things when I had the opportunity. And,
Yeah.
And I thought it was gone. I thought I would never get to go down the canyon.
Yep.
And that, and so I really, I have a great deal of understanding of what he felt.
Both of them.
Okay, audio rolling, visual.
Yeah. Camera's rolling.
Okay. Got it. Okay.
Tell us your name and what day we're on here.
My name is John D. Warner, and it is November 20th, 2013.
Believe it or not. Well, thanks for agreeing to talk to us. I have so many questions, but I think we should start at the beginning. And I understand you. So you grew up here in Richfield, and
That's right, yeah.
and so what were your early years, and where did you go to school, that sort of thing? And
Well, early years was over there in Richfield High School, and a brief period down in Houston, Texas, when my father was down there. But I graduated from Richfield High School in 1943 in the middle of World War II. And I was 17, but I turned 18 2 weeks after graduating. And they were drafting 18 years old. Well, a friend of mine and I enlisted in the Marines. And we stayed together the whole time, but we were in the Marines and out in the Pacific and in combat. So then after that, after the war, and school, and served a mission for my church, and
where'd you
back
go
to school. First at the University of Utah, and then at Brigham Young University, and I did my graduation from there. Well, after several other intermediate jobs, at a certain point in time, I became involved in management consulting, traveling all over the western United States and western Canada. With small children at home, I was gone far too much, so I was determined to do something else, and started inquiring around a little bit, and got a telephone call one night from the vice president at the University of Utah, asking if I would be interested in being an on-campus consultant to different departments and programs up
What year
there.
was this?
That would have been in about 47, I think.
I'm going to interrupt just really quick.
And
Sorry, I'm just going to adjust your mics just really quick.
47, John.
Sorry, really quick.
no, yeah, on 67.
67.
67.
Here we go. Just do that, and then yours as well.
Get it squared away.
Yeah, it's just the cloth is,
Yeah.
you know.
All right, I'll
picking
pick
up.
it back up. So,
Yeah.
Do we need to clap?
No,
Okay,
we're good. Nobody
So, 1967, you start in that university?
Yes, and I was the development office and the hospital and several other things I was given to work on. One was called the Division of Artificial Organs, where Dr. Kolff, and Dr. Kolff, you must remember, was the original inventor of artificial kidneys,
Yeah,
and
he-
was the leading
During the war
researcher in artificial, yes.
in the Netherlands.
In the Netherlands, he stole some of the things he needed from the occupying German army.
Yeah, and I've heard the story of his first patient that survived.
Yes.
Woke up from a uremic coma, and her first words, "I want a divorce."
Yes, that's a good story. Well, after the war, he made about 5 of those original rotating drum type artificial kidneys.
Contraptions, yeah.
Gave one to Sweden, one to London, 2 or 3 over here. And then shortly after, he came himself, first to the Cleveland Clinic.
Yeah.
But when he was getting more involved in artificial heart research, he wanted a full university. And so he was recruited to the University of Utah. When he came out to look at it, they took him up in the mountains, and he fell in love with the mountains, and he came here and brought his programs with him. Well, one of the programs was a or I guess he received it after he got here, was a $6 million cost study contract with the federal government, and to determine the costs of dialysis and versus center treatment versus home treatment and so on and so forth. So it's kind of a complex thing to develop the cost that they wanted, and he had an administrator to help him who didn't know how to do it. So that was one of the things I had to work on first. After I got it all set up and went up to...
your introduction to dialysis?
Yes, and to Dr. Kolf. When I got it all set up and went up to go over it with his administrator, that administrator realized he was not in the right job for him, and he left, and we had the $6 million contract. It had to get going right then, and I was the only one who knew how to do it. So I just went full time with Dr. Kolf.
Wow, so this would have been about 1970 or? Was it
68,
okay.
69, somewhere
Medicare
along there.
isn't paying for dialysis yet,
No,
but the federal government's kind of wondering what would this cost if
yeah,
they paid for it?
yeah. So we were allowed to take patients, and we had to also develop other sources, insurance and other means to help support it. So that's how I became involved with Dr. Kolf.
Oh, yeah.
But I have to tell you one thing about him. One of the things I will always remember, I always have, one of the first things he told me when I met him, he said, if we are going to keep people alive by artificial means, such as dialysis or eventually artificial heart things, he said, we incur the responsibility to see that that's in a good life, an enjoyable life, not just prolonging death. That was
Always the goal.
very, very important. That made a strong impression upon me. He was a great man. So that's how I got involved with the dialysis program, and right from the very first. And we had probably the most experienced dialysis staff in the world because of Dr. Kolf and some of his crew that he brought with him. So that was the beginning.
So I'm curious, what did your study determine as far as the cost? Was the home considerably less expensive?
Oh yes, oh yes. Home dialysis was very much cheaper than in a center. And one of those centers that there were others that were doing the similar studies. Mm-hmm. I'm sure it was up in Seattle.
Northwest, yeah.
Yeah, building Scribner and Chicago, Boston. I don't remember, maybe Atlanta. Yeah, I think Atlanta was. Well, those studies led to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which brought dialysis patients, renal failure patients, under the Medicare program,
Right.
if they or a parent or some family member had paid
Qualified
Social
into
Security.
Medicare, yeah.
Yeah. So that brought the federal government into it. Where do we want to go from there?
Well, I think at this point people are now, they're setting up centers, so that they must have set up a outpatient facility there at the University of Utah and grown their own programs?
Yeah, we had in-center dialysis, and we did a lot of training for home dialysis for people from not just Utah, but Nevada, Idaho, Wyoming, some from Arizona at first. And it was a very interesting and learning experience, but at some point we also started research on, well, Dr. Kolf was very resentful over the fact that this artificial kidney machine, which he invented and gave to the world without taking any patents or anything else, and they were charging such horrible prices for everything, making it so expensive. And so immediately When he was being recruited here, in fact, they showed him around different places, and there was a Job Corps program training young people where they made plastic nose cones for rockets
Okay.
for use in some of the initial rocket research and so forth. He looked at one of those and thought, now if we turned that upside down, put a little hole in here, and so he made what we called the nose cone dialysis machine. That was very low cost. Well, then there were the coils with the mesh and the plastic where the transfer would take place and the blood would go through that. They were very expensive. So he created a little winding machine where people could make their own at home using a nose cone hypobaric. It was called a nose cone hypobaric dialysis machine, which means negative pressure. Put it in other words, it could be called a nose cone suck-through artificial kidney. Somebody said it sounds like somebody needs their adenoids removed. So.
What were you using for the membrane?
Just getting some plastic tubing. I don't remember just the exact source of that, but it worked, and it was very cheap. And that was being used until Medicare got involved and was paying the cost, and nobody wanted to do all that bother when Medicare was providing it free, already done.
Yeah.
So that came to an end there, and everybody started going for these
Pre-made.
yeah, and more expensive
plate.
programs.
Yeah.
Well, then there was another problem, which you experienced and anybody else. People can't travel. They're restricted to the dialysis facility or their own home if they're dialyzing at home. And that was a big problem. Normally, when a person suffers total kidney failure, a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, they're dead from uremic poisoning. We can take that. The number one killer of dialysis patients was cardiovascular disease brought on by inactivity.
And phosphorus too.
They're hooked up to a machine 3 days a week and can't move. And that kind of fosters, it carries over. Yeah. And they just not active at all. And they develop cardiovascular
going back
disease.
To Dr. Kolf's original statement that we have to give them a life that's
is enjoyable. Under that contract, for the patients we took, the government restricted the kind of patients we could take. They can't have any other serious medical problems. Well, we happened to get a telephone call from a man in, I believe it was Kentucky. Nobody would accept his wife for dialysis. Would Dr. Kolf do it? She had a leg that had been amputated, couldn't get around. Under the federal government's restrictions, couldn't accept a patient like that. Dr. Kolf had his own ideas of acceptability. Do you love your wife? He asked the man. He said, yes, very much. Bring her out. Trained him for home dialysis. He went back. He got a travel trailer, rigged it up with the machine, and they traveled the country for years and had a very wonderful life.
Was that the first instance you had heard about
Yes.
someone traveling?
That gave him an idea. He was a member of the Rotary Club
Dr. Kolfa?
in Salt Lake.
Yeah.
He mentioned that to the Rotary Club. The Rotary Club bought a travel trailer and donated it to the university, and we rigged it up
Like early 70s.
and made it available, very early 70s, made it available to any patients who wanted to
Who had already done home dialysis.
to travel. We only knew one couple that did that. Well, to make them a little more familiar with it, we took that trailer down to Cedar City in Utah to the Shakespearean Festival and brought some patients down and dialyzed them in that trailer during the day, and they go to the Shakespearean plays at night, and on the non-dialysis days would travel to the Zion National Park and Cedar Breaks National Monument. Tried to get them acquainted with it. Still didn't get great success. People were afraid. You know, they'd rather be right here where they're used to it. And yeah. And so then, of course, we were also doing research on developing what we called the wearable artificial kidney that could run on batteries. And when we had a few prototypes of that, we needed to test them. I inquired of some patients, gave them two choices, I think another Shakespearean festival or a houseboat trip to Lake Powell. That's the one they said. And so we planned a trip to Lake Powell. I rented 4 houseboats, and we took 5 patients and any family who wanted to go, and went down there. We'd just go for 3 days and do 1 dialysis.
This is testing it out.
Testing it out, and it was great. Oh, they loved that. They wanted to do it again the next year.
Wow. So that was the...
And so we did it again the next year, and then I suddenly realized we spend 2 weeks getting ready to give them 3 days. Why don't we stay a week? And so we offered another trip that year and stayed a week. And that was big success. And so many wanted to go that pretty soon we had to do 2 trips a year.
On these trips, was this just people who were using home hemodialysis at the time?
No, they could come from the center.
And so you had staff?
Yep, we'd take the staff, a doctor, and a dietitian, and plan the meals. We'd take the technicians or nurses there so that we could take care of it.
And then,
They weren't used to this wearable artificial kidney anyway, so they weren't trained in the use of that.
oh, that's true. Yeah.
So,
And then, were you getting...
but illegally.
Okay.
We were approved, we were to be reimbursed for dialysis done only in our own inspected, approved, and
Right.
certified
Something that's
facility.
surveying.
Nothing outside except the patient's own home. Those were the only places where people could be dialyzed, but we were doing it and we were billing them for it. Well, the program, I'll have to come back to that in just a minute, but the program began to expand because I was taking some of our staff out on little expeditions, a Jeep safari in the Canyonlands,
Just kind of for fun.
back just for fun. These were staff people from all over the world working on the artificial heart or kidneys research. And one time when we'd been down to Lake Powell, we'd been doing the Lake Powell dialysis trips, but we had some staff come back from a trip in Jeeps down to Canyonlands National Park. And they started talking about it among themselves where patients could hear it. We had a 14-year-old girl from Wyoming, Kathy, who heard them and says, well, John, why don't you take us to Canyonlands National Park? Well, in Canyonlands National Park, there's no water. You go in and camp there, you have to bring your own water. But there's the park rangers have residences there. They had to have water, so I checked with them. Could we get water from you? Explained why.
So how much water per treatment were you looking at?
About 15 gallons per patient.
Yeah.
Five gallons at a time, but change 3 times.
And that's how the wearable artificial...
That's the wearable artificial kidney.
So the technical question, if you know, is that you use that low dialysate flow rate?
Yeah.
So like in center, the flow rate might be 500 milliliters a minute. And so these were like
I don't know that, but it was slower. Anyway, it took 15 gallons. You'd have to change the bath 3 times during the dialysis.
that's kind of like the next stage uses.
Yeah. At Lake Powell, we used the lake water, but we ran it through 2 things. Activated charcoal filter, take out any impurities, and a water softener. That was hard water. and then heated it.
So was that gas, I mean, a generator powering that, or what powered the RO?
Well, we had a little pump that we could pull the lake out from the thing and run it through a little heat exchanger and the filters and the
Oh, okay.
water softener.
And that was made just for the trips, or was that part of making it for the wearable artificial kidney?
That was for the trips primarily then.
Oh, somebody came up with that.
But anyway, she asked about Canyonlands, this little girl.
Yeah.
I checked with the park rangers down there, and they said, yes, you could get your water. I got a sample for it. It's water we could use. And so we reserved the group campground, and the next year we took them. Little Kathy says, can my mother come and go? I don't remember, it was in the early 70s.
Early 70s, okay.
And Kathy said, can my mother come and go? And I said, well, of course. And we took a group of patients down there. We dialyzed in tents. And on the between dialysis treatments, out on jeeps over these rugged trails and seeing all the sights and having a good time. And that was a successful trip. I think we stayed for 2 dialyses while we were there. I went to Kathy back in the center and said, well, Kathy, did you enjoy that? She said, oh, I sure did. That was so much fun. I said, you know, something I've always wanted to do is go on a river rafting trip. Couldn't you do that? Well, in Utah, river rafting is the Colorado or the Green River, which is flowing mud. But I had these friends that did river rafting trips at Tour West. I went to them and asked them, is there a place where we could ride the rapids for a day, then camp in a day where we could bring in the truck with the supplies and equipment and dialyze them, and then ride the rapids a day? And they said, yes, on the Colorado River above Moab, we could do that. So we set that up and started planning to do that. And for the next year, we had a visiting patient that winter from California. Kathy Steen was her name. And she was visiting here. She'd come up to do some skiing.
Oh, okay.
And was dialyzing at our center between skiing days. And she heard us talking about,
Hold on a second. Is that a bird? Oh, it's your clock.
Oh,
on the hour, different birds
How are we
sing.
going on 12 minutes?
yeah,
already
we're
changed
good.
over.
Yeah, do you want to restart?
No, I'm good.
Oh, you're good?
Okay, we'll just line it up and pluralize. It should be fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So she's coming out here to go skiing, that's great.
Yes,
Great
and
starting
she
point.
heard us talking about that river rafting trip.
Okay.
Could I come back up next summer and go on that with you? I said, well, sure. And so we went on with our plans and everything was set up and going. And I got a call from her along in the spring. I think it was in June when we were going to do the trip. She called and said, there's another girl down here who would like to come. Can she come? Well, okay. Another week went by. There's a boy here who would like to come. Can he come? I said, let me speak to your head nurse. So I've got 3 of your patients want to come and go on this river trip. We want one of your staff to come along. Oh, I can get somebody, she said. She came. And
So
the 3
did you-
patients.
So at this stage, were you getting medical records from the patients to
Oh, yes.
see that they're
Yes,
stable
that
and-
started there. We had to have complete medical records before they arrived, before we'd even accept them.
right? Okay.
Our doctors had to prove, yes, we can accept
Okay.
those patients. So we did that little rafting trip,
And these were in-center patients.
in-center patients or home, whatever.
It didn't matter.
It didn't matter. And it was great. It was fun, and they
So
enjoyed
are
it.
you taking 10 people at this point?
No, 5.
5, okay.
We went to 10 later because we could do 2 shifts on a day. While we were on that river trip, one of the river guides on the boats said, you know, this is kind of kid stuff here. Why don't you take them through the Grand Canyon? I said, yeah, sure. Where would we bring the truck in with the equipment and supplies and the water? Oh, yeah, well, we do the Salmon River in Idaho. That's clear water. I said, oh, so I went to my friends who were the heads of that rafting company. Could you bring me a sample of the Salmon River water? Checked out, okay. We started planning for the Salmon River.
And that's a longer trip.
That's a long ride up there and all that sort of thing. Word was getting out. We had a call from Seattle. We had a call from Houston, Texas.
Do you know how that word's getting out?
Well, we were patients, you know, is the NAPT, N-A-P-H-T?
Yeah, National Associations of Patients Using Hemodialysis.
And transplant.
They turned into AAKP.
Okay.
But they started, Peter Lundin started that group out of New York.
Yeah, yes, that's right.
In order to lobby for the Medicare coverage.
Well, we had some of these people go on these trips and they'd write little articles to be printed in that.
Ah.
So that started good. And at a certain point in time, I had to say to Dr. Kolf, look, this thing's kind of getting out of hand. What should we do? And he said, well, you hire an assistant administrator and you go with this and see how far it can go.
Can I just ask you, you got involved on that study, and then, but now it sounds like you're pretty much working full-time with the dialysis program. Did that?
Oh yes, I was
So
full-time.
that,
Full-time. Take over that program, I just went full-time there and got out of the rest of that.
Okay.
And never looked back, and I never regretted either. It was just, but it's kind of funny because I gave up the consulting outside, you know, all over the country because it was too much travel, and I get on the university and what am I doing?
Traveling.
Starting a travel program, but a totally different kind of travel, and it was very, very rewarding. Well, so we started pushing it. We started actually doing some advertising, and it started growing.
People know about it.
But we were also still billing Medicare for it. And I wasn't hiding it. I told some of the Medicare people one time what we were doing. Oh, well, you can't do that. You'll have to refund that money. I said, no, I won't refund it. I said, what do you do about it? Well, we'll have to take legal action. By this time, I was pretty familiar with that Rehabilitation Act of 1973. I said, good, you do it. I had asked them to extend coverage to this program, and they wouldn't. They just flat out refused. And this went on for a year or two, and I was very annoyed with them that they wouldn't do it, but they just flat out refused. And they said, and besides, you're accumulating a big bill you're going to have to pay back. I said, well, you'd have to sue me in court. Well, that Rehabilitation Act of 1973 said that any person, a handicapped person, who is denied access to any national facility, national parks, national recreation area, or anything, either directly or by adopting policies that effectively prohibit them from going there, which is exactly what Medicare was doing.
Yeah.
I said, go ahead and sue me. I would have welcomed it. Eventually, I filed a complaint of discrimination with the Office of Civil Rights against HCFA, Healthcare Financing Administration. There was long silence from there, and I called finally. Well, we determined that is discrimination, but we have no enforcement authority over other federal agencies.
Wow.
I took a different course. I started going to Congress. I went back there. I lobbied with almost every senator in the Senate. Some of them were just, all of them were totally positive and affirmative. They sent a letter to HCFA saying, expressing the will and desire of the Senate that this be granted to them.
Wow.
They still resisted it. We got the word, this was the Carter administration then. Patricia Harris was the Secretary of HHS. We got through to her. She says, I will see that it's done. It will be done by Christmas of that year. About Christmas time, she called, has it been done? I said, no, it hasn't. Well, there was one man in there, I won't even mention his name, I'll never forget it, but I won't mention it this time, who was the stumbling block, the block there. He just refused. She said, well, I'll change that in a hurry. She called, it was Christmas time. He was home on vacation for the Christmas holidays. She called him, Patricia Harris, called him at home and said, your vacation is canceled. You get back in the office tomorrow and you'll never get another vacation until dialysis patients do.
Wow.
We got to change. Pretty soon we're legal and certified. It wasn't for me because I wasn't afraid of billing them. They could never have sued me or done anything about it. But I thought, well, maybe other places should be doing this thing too. Boys camps, kids camps and things like that. It should be expanded.
To this day, actually, there are camps that set up
Yes.
for a couple weeks.
Yes.
And that's about when our camp started, was 76, 77.
So you may have
Yes.
opened the
Yeah.
door on that.
Yeah.
Because Dialysis Clinic Inc. has a yearly camp for kids. It's called
Camp Okawina.
Yeah.
Okawina.
I've heard that. Yeah.
And
Well,
probably
that's why I
opened-
thought
you
we
kicked
had
that
to
door
get
open.
it through. We had to get that thing through there, and so we did. Well, meanwhile, Dialysis in Wonderland was still growing and expanding, and we took on other trips, quite a variety. Grand Canyon, Bryce and Zion are right there,
Yeah.
quite close together, and we would rent cabins and dialyze in the cabin, and others for the patients and their family to stay in, and coming from all over the country. And let me tell you about one man's experience at the Grand Canyon. We were at the north rim of the Grand Canyon. This man was a millionaire from California. Very wealthy man. He flew up in his Learjet to go with us there. I think we'd been to Zion, and then we were at Grand before going up to Bryce.
All on
Canyon.
kind of a
Yeah,
national park
yeah.
tour, yeah.
But at the north end of the Grand Canyon, one morning we got them all up early, and we walked out this narrow trail that goes out onto a point, Bright Angel Point.
Yeah.
Incredible view of the whole canyon there. And it happened that morning, there were some storm clouds down in the canyon below us. And we watched the sun. We go out there to watch the sunrise. That's a thing to do at the North Rim. It's the most beautiful morning I'd ever seen out there because you could look down and see rainbows
Wow.
down in the canyon. It was just incredible. We stayed there for quite a while, and as we were about to go back, I can't remember that man's name, the millionaire. Couldn't find him. I wanted to be sure everybody we had to go back. We had to get breakfast, and then we had to have dialysis. Where was he? I asked around, nobody knew. Well, that look point, it kind of circles around a big rock up here, and there's fences around it. You almost have a 360-degree view from out there. There he was, sitting up on top of that rock. If around behind, you could get up there. The others were starting back. I walked up, and I walked up there to that rock and sat down behind him, and he's sitting there with tears coming down his cheeks. I said, "What's the matter? Something wrong?" "No, something is very right." He said, "All my life, I've had one goal, and that is money, to make money. And I've been very successful at it. Never took time to see the beauty of this world. Kidney failure. When I was told I couldn't travel or thought I couldn't travel, I suddenly wanted to. And I heard about this trip. They said this morning, I'm almost grateful that I have kidney failure. It has opened my eyes. That's quite a statement, something we could all learn from. And that was a good experience there. Well, we did that and continuing some canyonlands in the lake. Powell was going about 3 times a week. Summer, 3 times a summer. And we even did one for 2 weeks down there. And that was still going. And then we started doing other river trips. We did the Yampa and repeated the Salmon River. We added Hawaii.
Which you mentioned, there wasn't in-center dialysis at that time in Hawaii.
In Hawaii, it wasn't there.
So you couldn't visit it if
No,
you wanted to.
no.
If you were using that.
But actually, when the Medicare coverage came in view, one of the conditions was that we had to have an agreement with the nearest available other facility for backup services if we needed it. And by the time we started doing the Hawaii trips, there was one in Honolulu.
Can I just, question, so you had.
They volunteered their time. Their expenses were paid by the dialysis fees. The dialysis patients and their family members paid.
I see, yeah.
There was no profit in it. We weren't looking to make any money. We just covered expenses. Sometimes not even that.
So you'd usually have maybe one nurse per couple patients, or?
Yeah, about that between doctor and nurse and technicians, enough that they could dialyze 5 at a time. And like I said, we eventually added to where we could take 10 patients and do 2 shifts on a dialysis
Demand,
day.
huh?
Yeah, just from sheer demand. And I had a wonderful experience, and I'll show you a picture of this later, but we had a Hispanic boy, probably in his 20s, 21, 2, from Denver, went on this trip to Hawaii. We're dialyzing there on Maui on Kaanapali Beach, and from those kind of cottages they had out there, quite expensive but very nice. We were dialyzing him under the palms. And while he was sitting out there in the lawn chair being dialyzed, the girls in their bikinis were walking by, and there was this one with long dark hair, beautiful as could be. And she kind of walked back and forth, and his eyes just followed her wherever she went. And finally she kind of left and went back over towards the main hotel building. And he followed her there, and she went out of sight, and you could see the disappointment in his face. I took off after her and caught up with her. Excuse me, miss, may I ask you a question? And she said, yes. I said, I told her about this boy that had been admiring her. And I assumed she was Polynesian. And I said, we've got some patients over there who are being dialyzed. Oh, is that what's going on? That's why I walked back and forth. I was trying to figure out what was going on. Well, she wasn't Polynesian. She was from Paris, France.
Wow.
She was a dialysis nurse. And I said, well, you'd probably be interested in that then. But I said to this young man, he's very shy, and he couldn't keep his eyes off you. Would you come out and pose for a picture with him for me to take? And I took several pictures. She knelt down and put her arm around him. And I got some pictures, and I can show you those pictures. When I got back, and I had a big one blown up, and I had to go to a meeting in Denver one time, I went to his dialysis facility and put it on a conspicuous place on the wall in there when he came in. Oh, he turned red as a beet and everything, but he was so pleased. But there are a lot of fun things that can come out of
man,
this
that's
kind of a program, and that going to Hawaii was very good. We went a number of times, Kauai, Maui, and I think the Big Island once too. So those were good, and it was still just growing and getting bigger, and we added the Virgin Islands, anywhere United States or its territories. For Medicare payments. We went to the Virgin Islands in St. John. We went to Puerto Rico, stayed in a nice resort there. We went to, and Hawaii, those are the ones. I did think of American Samoa, but my wife and I, to check it out, we took that flight from Honolulu to Samoa. About did us in. I didn't, it was too much. It was crowded and a lot of little Polynesian kids and everything, and it was hot. It was a nice, beautiful place, and they did have a little, the LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson Hospital there. It had a dialysis facility, but they couldn't handle that many patients, but they could provide her backup. And we worked all that out, but then decided that trip was just too long. So we never made it there. But where else did we go? Yellowstone National Park? Yeah. Yes, we were up there, and Grand Tetons.
So you told me a little story.
Yes, up there, we rented little cabins out near Old Faithful.
Yeah, yeah.
Between
Old
dialysis
Faithful,
treatments, we'd tour the whole park and see the buffalo and all the other geysers and everything, but we'd dialyze outside of these cabins, between the cabins and Old Faithful. And Old Faithful was faithful. And so we timed the dialysis by that. After 3 eruptions, it's time to come off. So that was very successful too. And trying to think of any other. Oh, we did a.
Puerto Rico.
I mentioned Puerto Rico. We did one up to a ski resort up above Salt Lake and stayed a couple nights up there. And dialyzed them up there in a big lodge. It's the Wasatch Mountain Club, a private club that has members. Could be rented. Dr. Kolf was a member of that club. And
Did Dr. Kolf go on the
yes, he would sometimes go along to visit a little bit of it, but not too much. They got to do some skiing and snowmobiling and so forth, and we took a little projector and showed some old-time movies, Laurel and Hardy and things like that, and had some fun up there. And so that was another one that was kind of unique, and I guess that's pretty much.
Back east, like up into Appalachians or?
No, never did get up into there. We did a backpack hike in Canyonlands where we had our base camp, but we'd go out and make a big hike into some remote areas and camp overnight and then come back in to the base camp. We had young people and old people. I did one on houseboats on Lake Mead for welfare patient type patients in Las Vegas and Nevada. And so we did a trip down there for them. But children on these trips were just particularly wonderful. Another patient, 11-year-old Cherry Coffee. I saw her first in the dialysis center there at University Hospital. 11 years old, skinny as a rail. She was dying. She was no longer going to school. She wasn't visiting friends. She had pretty much given up. She wasn't eating. And her mother was standing there with her, and I approached her and said, Cherry, wouldn't you like to go on one of our houseboat trips to Lake Powell? And her mother was just indignant that I would dare even suggest such a thing for someone so sick. She wrote a little story about this afterwards, the mother did. Well, that certainly wouldn't be possible. doctor would have to approve it. Sherry had said yes, she would. Well, the doctor approved it. Well, we can't do that anyway. She has an older sister who's the real victim of this illness. She's been the most neglected child there ever was. We won't neglect her. She can come too. And so eventually they went. And I'll show you a picture of her later. Gradually, she got interested in some of the activities. She would get in the water and swim a little bit. We always challenged them to jump off the top of the houseboat down into the lake too. I have a picture of her mid-air jumping off of there. I climbed up a cliff, a steep mountain, tied her big long rope up there and had her between my arms, and we pulled ourselves up to Indian ruins up there. And then back down, and then more swimming. And she caught a fish, and she was having some fun.
And her sister.
Her sister was along having fun. She was a sweet girl. Another thing we would sometimes do is the boats are beached each night, sandy beaches. And the sand is wet there at the water's edge. We get in mud fights. And just pile mud on everybody's faces and things like that. I got some pictures of that too. So they were all having fun, but Sherry's, the big story, her appetite exploded on that trip. She started eating. She came back with gained weight while she was on that trip. That was a turnaround in her life. She's alive to this day.
Wow.
School teacher. Her parents were a
transplanted?
school teacher, transplant eventually. But she couldn't for years.
Yeah.
And the same, you know what, that story.
What year was that roughly that you probably took her, would you guess?
I'd guess about 76 or 77, maybe 78.
It just goes to talk about the psychology of a chronic illness and how easy with dialysis particularly you can fall into this rut of almost despair.
Yes, that's it exactly. And
you
that,
gotta somehow break through that rut.
yes,
And that's what these trips did.
they did. She went on the Salmon River trip
Oh,
too.
so now she's hooked. Huh?
Yeah, she was hooked. At one point, after a couple of years on the houseboats at Lake Powell, I wrote them and sent them the dates for the dates, plural, for the upcoming trips. And I got a letter back saying, well, after several years of going on those, we've decided we'll just do something else this summer for a vacation. I don't know what they would do. Well, I let that pass for a time, but as the time got closer, one day at their home up in Salt Lake, there was a doorbell rang, and Mrs. Coffey went there and opened the door. It was a Salt Lake City policeman who announced that he had a court summons for one Sherry Coffey, this little girl. Mother was just couldn't believe it. How is that possible? And the policeman said, I have to hand it to her personally. She went and brought Carrie in, and he handed her this court summons.
Canyon, the Grand Canyon.
That just worked on my mind for a long time. Finally, we had engineers and physicists and chemists and all kinds of people on our staff. I said, come on, come up with something that we can handle that Colorado mud. Well, they did. They designed with a little gas engine powered water pump. They could pump first through a sediment filter.
Yeah.
We had to take a lot of those filters along because they would fill up in a hurry. And then it would go through the activated charcoal, then through a propane powered heat exchanger, and then come out body temperature, purified, cleaned, softened, water softener. Did I mention that? We went down there to the Colorado and tested it out, and it worked, and the water was perfectly fine. So my wife and daughter and I went with Tour West on the trip as crew to find out the places we would need and how rough it would be and so on and so forth.
What time of year that was, probably?
Well, I think our first trip was in June. I can't remember for
Yeah.
sure. But it was, we didn't go in there as early as they started in the spring. It's kind of cold. That water's cold.
Oh, wow, it is.
And,
Down at the bottom of Lake Powell, it's
yes.
48 degrees. Or
Yeah,
something.
it's cold. So we weren't too interested in subjecting them to too many challenges.
It's also pretty hot, though.
It can be hot and then brr.
Yeah.
It can be cold. So and then we scheduled the trip, and we had the equipment, and we sent the word out, and we got plenty of people wanting to come. World Medical News wanted to send a crew along, photographer and writer, which they did.
World
Yeah.
Medical News?
Yeah,
Try to
that
look
set
up.
the story out all over the world, and we did that trip, and I think it was the second year when we did it that we had the big high waters.
And that was a historic flood year in
Flood
the
year.
Colorado Basin. And
The Lake Powell was full and going through the spillways, overflowing. They had to build up the spillways a little higher to have it come higher, Lake Powell. They had to move the store from the marina up away from the whole lake was just rising to record heights, higher than it had ever been planned for. And then water was coming down.
The peak of that, I know from reading up on it, was about June 20th to the 25th. Is that when you were?
Probably about that time. We start from Lee's Ferry,
Yeah.
and we go down.
And the water's already pretty high.
It's already pretty high. The average per previous trip was between 15 to 18,000
Yeah.
cubic feet per second.
Yeah.
When we started that trip, it was about 45. So that was higher. As the first day, going down before we reached our first campsite, a helicopter came flying down over and dropped a message. Camp high. We're increasing it to 60,000 cubic feet per second. We camped high. Next day, a helicopter flying down dropped a message. Camp higher. We're increasing it to 90,000 cubic feet per
I have to ask
second.
you, during this high water, Crystal Rapid changed in its nature to
They all
a
did.
monster, though.
Little ones became big ones. Big ones were sometimes smoothed over. It was a totally different. They never
Did
knew
you
what
go
to
through
expect.
Crystal?
Yes.
You did.
We went through them all, and after one of them, we were camped down below it when we noticed some debris coming down. Well, a group coming through behind us, a boat had capsized.
Oh, it got chewed to
And
pieces.
one person,
man
one
died.
life was lost.
Yeah.
There were other
tour bus too,
boats
wasn't
with them, and they picked up the others, but one had capsized. But we didn't. We made all of them, and we always went down to Lava Rapids, which is the biggest one of the whole
Lava Falls.
Lava Falls, and then just below that is the park boundary.
that's
And
the
they had a
helicopter.
helipod there, and
Yeah.
we helicopter up.
That's mile 188, I believe.
Yeah.
Is the helicopter.
So
So you saw
That
the
was the-
Tetris. I mean, they closed the river for a couple of days. It must have been right after
yeah,
you went through.
yeah,
And so you had 10 people using dialysis on that trip, probably.
yeah.
And you would raft a day and then
Dialyze a
dialyze
day.
But now the normal beaches are gone, right? I mean, the water's up. So you're
That
winging
was
it
hard.
a little bit?
That made it hard. We didn't have very good campsites there a couple of times. And one time, I woke up, we had these canvas fold-out cots that we would sleep on, and I put my foot off the cot and splash.
Oh my God.
That was a real different trip. Like I say, rapids where there hadn't been any, and some of that were kind of bad.
You know, I have to tell you, as a dialysis patient, I've had things happen to me where I was mugged in Costa Rica, and I just felt like this terrible getting mugged, but it's just the idea that I had this adventure. That when you start dialysis, you're not going to have any of these crazy adventures. And I have to believe that people on that trip just thought, I'm having this adventure. And it was a singular experience. I mean,
Yeah.
that water has never been that high.
Was that what I told you about the college president? Was that before we were recording?
Yeah, it was. If you can tell that story.
Yeah.
That, because I had this similar idea that I thought I had forever lost my opportunity to take a raft trip through the canyon, which if
Yeah.
I had healthy kidneys, I know that's something I would have done. And I just took that as a lesson to take advantage of things when you can.
Yep. This man was a retired college president, actually, from California. And in his youth, he had attended a lecture by a man by the name of Dellenbaugh, who had accompanied John Wesley Powell on his explorations down, first ever to go down the Colorado River and through the Grand Canyon. Lake Powell is named after him.
One-armed Civil War veteran.
That's right.
Who rode through on top of a chair.
Tied into that chair.
Good chair.
Through rapids.
Not knowing anything that's coming up.
Don't know what's ahead. Incredible. Well, this college president had been so impressed by that, he had made the vow at that time, told Dellenbaugh, I'm going to do that someday. But in his professional career and everything, he never took the time to do it, and then he retired and then came down with kidney failure. I'll never be able to do that now. He felt so bad about it. Then he got this, through what source, I don't know, but he was on the phone immediately. I understand you're taking dialysis patients down through the Grand Canyon. I said, yes. May I come? Of course. He did. He came.
And he was how old?
82 years old. And he just absorbed that whole canyon. He just couldn't take his eyes off of it. It was just a big smile on his face the entire time, even when a big wave was hitting him full in the face. He loved it, and it was great. And then he wrote a paper, a letter to Dellenbaugh. I kept my promise, telling about his trip. Those kinds of things are just so wonderful.
You're taking patients down obstacles, or what kinds of things happened that you had to overcome that, just looking back may seem crazy that you even did it?
On one trip, I think it was the first trip, because it was when those World Medical News people were along. One young fellow of our own patients had a blood clot in his fistula. Is that what we call it? Or anyway, the access site. Yeah. And that was a serious thing. We could have gotten him out at that time and offered him the choice. The doctor who was along said, I can take care of it here, but it might be very painful.
Wow.
So it's up to you. He opted to stay. Well, the doctor did it, and it worked out real well. So there was no problem there. But another trip, later we had a fellow from California who had been on several other kinds of trips with us. And on one of the days, I don't remember which, one of the bigger rapids, he fell over against something and bumped his leg, and he got a big hematoma swelling there. If it's a water hematoma, it's no problem. If it's a blood one, and that blood begins to break down, it excretes potassium.
Yeah.
The doctor who was along didn't want to take that chance. We were able to call in a helicopter and evacuate him out.
I thought I might have read, because I did look up as much as I could find about these trips, I might have read the article from the Medical World News. It was in an Anchorage paper that they must have gotten that through some source. And did someone break a wrist on a trip? Or, I mean, no?
No, on the Hawaii trip, a patient broke a collarbone when a wave toppled him over. I was right there with him, able to get him out and quickly, but he kind of hit the sand on his shoulder.
Yeah.
That wasn't too serious. He stayed the rest of the trip. There was no problem. We had a patient from Seattle on our trip to the Virgin Islands on St. John. I don't know who her doctor was. I'm sure of one thing. It was neither of the two main ones there,
Scribner or Blag. Yeah.
Scribner nor Blag. So I don't know who it was because I know those two. We get the medical report from them before we accept them for a trip. Hers, they were just a second marriage for both of them. She was Japanese ancestry, he was Caucasian. He was a well-to-do man, fortunately. She was the patient. Everything on her medical report from her doctor looked fine. But it wasn't. She had terrible heart problems. She would never have been accepted on any trip. He didn't report that. We got down to St. John and she started having some problems. We could take her over to St. Joseph, where there was a dialysis facility. We had an agreement they would take her. They couldn't do much for her. They brought in a Learjet to fly her back to Seattle, but she died en route. He had insurance, trip insurance, that would have paid the cost of the Learjet had that doctor report been accurate.
But because it was fudged,
He lost the insurance and he lost his wife. That's the only really serious thing that we had happen, but it shouldn't have ever happened.
No, you have to rely on people's
Yeah.
forthrightness. Yeah.
When you were on the Colorado River, especially during that time when the water was high, when you went to bed on your cot, what were you thinking about? Because you had to be a little nervous about what's going to happen tomorrow in the next.
Well, they'd increase it each day, and so you wonder, well, how much are they? We never did know, but there were places where you could stop where no matter how much they released out, they couldn't release enough to reach you there. So we were safe.
But you had gone the year before, so you had an idea of what to
yes.
expect, and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden now it's a whole different. And were the guides, were they evincing some nervousness?
Yes, they were quite taken by surprise by some of the rapids. But they, you know, with a group like ours, they were a little extra cautious. Sometimes they'd hit the waves to give people more thrill.
Yeah.
We were not doing that. There's enough thrill without deliberately increasing it.
Yeah.
And so we went through safely. We had no problems whatsoever. And that was a very good thing. Were we on record when I told about the patient? No, I don't think we were. This was when just you and I were talking. We were at Lake Powell one time, and we had a couple from Los Angeles or somewhere in Southern California. The man was the patient. His name was Bill, and his wife was along. We'd been there several days, and near the end of the stay at Lake Powell, she came to me and she said, "John, could you ask your doctor here to give Bill's doctor a call in California and tell him how it is you're dialyzing him, because he feels so much better
There must be some
on this
magic
trip."
dialysis.
Yes, there's some magic in that dialysis. I told her right then on the spot. I said, "I can tell you right now how we dialyze him. We dialyze him exactly as his doctor told us to. We get that information from him. There's no change, no difference in the dialysis. The magic is there, but it's in him. He's active, he's swimming, he's fishing, he's hiking, he's doing things, and he's improving. Their hematocrits improve on these trips all the time. Almost every parameter they measure improves. Their appetites improve. Attitudes. And a lady from New York, the same thing. This was on the Grand Canyon and National Park trip. Could you have your doctor call my doctor back in New York? That idiot doesn't know how to dialyze me like you do. I haven't felt this good in a long time. Again, the magic is in you. You're walking these trails. You're seeing new things, doing new things.
Feeling normal.
Yeah. And that's the magic of it. And that was the magic of it and is the magic in your case. That's what keeps you going.
Yeah. I feel normal.
Yeah. You're living life as life should be lived. And dialysis patients can do that with the right attitude.
So what happened? How was this the vision of what it meant to use dialysis 30 years ago, more and more? And now today, there's ability to maybe visit another unit, although even now seems kind of hard for people. And there's people that use the machine I do, certainly, that are out and about, but that's maybe 1 or 2% of the population.
Yes.
Maybe 7% using peritoneal dialysis, but 90-some percent, 400,000 people now are in center, 380,000, something like that, that don't have this idea, and it isn't part of the worldview of dialysis.
Well, unfortunately, when you're taking care of people so intensely and so completely, it fosters dependence. And they're uncomfortable getting away from their doctor and their nurse and their familiar surroundings for dialysis. It's a frightening thing to be on dialysis, to be confronted with it. And so you have to sympathize with them a little bit too on that. But how did we come for all that to fall away? One big problem was liability insurance. Medical liability insurance, premiums skyrocketing. We were covered initially by a broad university policy wherever we went. But as the prices soared, in order to cut costs, policy was restricted to only the campus. We couldn't go out. I tried buying insurance for that program for a time. It was too costly. Now, a dialysis facility that does dialysis 5 days a week, 52 weeks out of a year, can maybe get enough income to cover that. Where you're doing a week here and a week there and weeks and months at a time where you're not doing it, we couldn't cover it.
Did any of your trips have claims against the insurance?
No. Never did.
So it was just required.
We had them sign a waiver,
Sure.
which might not have held up in court anyway, but it was maybe psychological. But there was nothing to file a claim about.
Right.
Everything
Just all the what ifs
went
somebody
well.
come up with.
The poor guy that had to be evacuated out of the Grand Canyon, he got his money refunded for the trip, but he had no complaint. He'd been with us before. He wouldn't have sued us for anything. So, but that's what closed it down. I tried to do some trips for a while after that, where we'd just book into dialysis facilities. We've had groups now dialyzed on the Navajo reservation down in Arizona, and did 1 or 2 to Hawaii that way, and 1 in Puerto Rico that way. But to reimburse dialysis patients for
in 1983, they came up with the composite rate. It was like $130, and it stayed the same until 2002.
Yeah, well, up until 1983, it was 150, and then they, instead of increasing it, as the cost went up, they cut it.
Yeah.
Well, that forced dialysis facilities all over the country to operate at maximum efficiency. All your machines full all the time as much as you can. We couldn't book in anybody. Nobody could take 5 or 10 patients. It was impossible. And that was the end of dialysis in Wonderland.
Just
But it was great while it lasted. It was wonderful while it lasted. As for myself, I retired from the university and got in the travel business again. Became a tour operator, take busloads of people all over the western states here.
urinators.
Did that for several years and then finally retired here to our 8 acres and have where I said, I did part-time tours for a while. I would tell people when they'd ask me what I'm doing these days, I said, well, I'm a part-time farmer, a part-time tour guide, and a full-time grandpa.
How many grandkids you got?
13 grandkids, and we got now 14 great-grandchildren.
Wow.
They're the best things in the world.
Are they in the area mostly, or?
Well, we got a couple in Ohio and some in Arizona, and the rest are here in Utah.
So you mentioned a few of the
Can
patients.
we take a quick break?
Sure.
I have to switch
Yep.
some of the batteries out really quickly, if
Yep.
that's okay. Yeah, in
No.
front. Okay.
All right. So I wondered if you could tell me a little bit about some of the patients that came through to where I know that I got to know for a couple of years through online Peter Lundeen, Dr. Peter Lundeen,
Mm-hmm.
and he's a well-known patient and was a great advocate. And so maybe you could tell a couple stories about some of the.
Well, Dr. Peter Lundeen, and what was his wife's name, do you know? I think she was a nephrologist also, if I remember correct.
Let's wait for the.
Okay, wait for the,
Oh,
there we go.
Okay, so it's Dr. Peter Lundeen, and I'm not going to be able to remember the wife's name.
yeah.
No,
I had some meetings with them at the various medical meetings and so forth, and talked them into coming on our river rafting trip down the Salmon River in Idaho, the famous River of No Return. But we did return.
yeah, it's through the wilderness and no return back.
But I got to know him real well there, and we had a lot of fun on that trip. By the way, I've got a picture of one patient dialyzing on the bank of the river, holding up a fish he caught while he was dialyzing.
While he was dialyzing?
Yes. But Dr. Lundeen, near the end of the trip, we had some little inflatable kayaks, rubber kayaks. And near the end of the trip, we're in just a certain amount of rapids that they could go through. We let some people get in and ride those down with life preservers on, of course, which we had on all the way through the trip. But Dr. Lundeen and I got in one together. He was in the front and I was in the back. And we hit this, we could see this one pretty good wave coming up. And I thought, boy, this is going to be fun. But we hit it and it tilted like that. And he should have leaned over that
High
way.
side, they call it.
The high side. He leaned the other way and the raft flipped. And so we went in the water and we bounced down through the rapids for a ways before we managed to get the hold of the canoe again and climb back in. Fortunately, our paddles had ropes attached to them, so we didn't lose those. Then we were able to paddle on down to the shore where we were. But that was a good fun. I'm glad it happened. It made the trip more memorable for him.
Yeah.
And we weren't really in any danger, but it was kind of a shock to him, but that was fun. We had a good laugh over that.
You're attending these national meetings, and so you were the head of the National Renal Administrators Association.
Yes.
And knew many of the people setting up units and growing through the industry and some of the political battles. And I mean, through those days, it must have been kind of frustrating and rewarding too to see the direction things are taking.
Yes, the biggest frustration was that long battle with the Healthcare Financing Administration, that one guy there. But we won that one. And there were a lot of senators that were really wonderful in helping us out on that. And then, of course, Patricia Harris, the secretary of...
Was it Magnuson or Warren? Were they part of your allies? Or
yes, and who was the one from Oregon at that time?
Hatfield?
Hatfield, yes, he was there. Also, another one, Senator Sam Nunn of Georgia, and Herman Talmadge of Georgia. When I went into his office there in Washington, D.C., he was this old Southern courtly gentleman. Yes, come on in, son, sit down over here.
I have to say,
Listen
it's
to...
not common to meet with the senators these days.
Yeah, he was just as nice as he could be, and very supportive of the thing. I certainly will support you in that, I sure will. But in his desk, at his desk, they had plastic all around, and up on the wall, and the spittoon over there by the wall, and that's why the plastic was there. He was a chewer.
Wow.
And he would let it fly every once in a while. He never hit the spoon once.
Pretty good East Georgia draw.
It was just a wonderful experience. I enjoyed that so much. But he was a courtly old Southern gentleman.
So were you involved when the composite payment came into effect, and that sort of that period from 1978 to 1973 when, the way I understand it, that's kind of when home hemodialysis got disadvantaged, and some of the details from that, or?
Well, the home dialysis before medical coverage came in was highly important because it was far less costly. That was the economics of it. It was the way to go.
And I would say
it was less profitable for the doctors. They couldn't charge as much fees for the dialysis as they did when it's done in center.
It was a cost plus, right?
Yeah, but there were other places that did some home dialysis training, but it was Seattle and Utah that really pushed that the most. They had the most success with it. Dr. Stribner and Bragg and Dr. Kolf here. And that was always Dr. Kolf's objective. By the way, when I got going, well, as I have already intimated, I had to go to him and say, well, what are we going to do with this thing? It's getting out of control. He was 100% in support of it. In fact, we would get, I remember one patient from Virginia, from back in the hills of Virginia, a hillbilly, literally. A social worker there thought that kind of a trip would be so good for him, but he couldn't afford it. Dr. Kolf paid his way. We got him a free hotel room for a night in Salt Lake. And he went on a good trip with us down to Canyonlands National Park, and it was good for him. But that was Dr. Kolf. He supported, out of his own pocket, he would put money in and help people and do everything he could to support the program. That was another problem when, a reason I got out of it and actually left the university. They brought in a new doctor. Dr. Kolf was way beyond the legally required retirement age at the university, and finally had to come. And they brought in a new doctor who didn't care much about it. Our job is to take care of patients while they're here in the hospital, and between dialysis is none of our concern.
That's kind of what happened writ large wouldn't you say?
Yes.
That there was a
Yes.
changeover from
Yeah.
what is of your concern, which is, are they living a full life, and is this a useful procedure to, are they surviving the treatment while they're here?
And this particular doctor even said, I just can't afford to have my staff going out and going on all those trips like that either. He says, I'm sure you can be able to recruit some others from other places, which we had volunteers from other places a lot of times. Oh, I'll have to tell you one other little story about that too. But so I left the university and still continued to do the dialysis trips from a travel agency. And guess who the staff were that went on? The ones from the university hospital taking their vacation time in order to do it. There's another little story I wanted to tell you in Canyonlands National Park. We had another little Hispanic young boy, well, probably 18 or 19. And on that trip, I had been from Grand Junction, Colorado, and I had been out there to their facility, and I knew this doctor real well, and I talked him into going along because he had a 4-wheel drive vehicle. And he came, and this young boy, and I think he had another patient or two. And at Lake Powell, or any of these trips, we had one ironclad rule. Everybody takes their turn washing dishes, helping cook, and everything else. Cleaning the houseboat or whatever. Everybody. Doctors are not exempt. No one is exempt. We even had at one time to go on a houseboat trip, signed up Congressman Dan Rostenkowski from Illinois.
Yeah. He went on one of the
No, he was signed up and was coming, and then they changed some schedule of some big thing back there, and he had to cancel out at the last minute. But I made it clear to him, he'll be washing the dishes too. Well, this young, shy Hispanic boy from Grand Junction ended up, his hands in the dishpan, and right next to him was his doctor. Their hands, both of them washing dishes together at the same time. The biggest grin on his face, he'd look up at the doctor and back at that. That meant so much to him. I think that greatly improved their doctor-patient relationship.
They connected as people.
They connected as people there, yeah.
Can you talk a little
That
bit?
doctor's just a human being like me.
Yeah. Just, I've written and talked in defense of travel, that the idea that travel is somehow a frivolity, that it's something that can be cast aside because you have this serious illness. What do you think of it?
Well, travel is the fountain of youth. If you are traveling, you're seeing new things, you're meeting new people, you're learning. You're learning something new always when you travel. You'll never get, group or individual or whatever, new things, new food, new experiences. That's going to keep you young for years and years and years. And Augustine, I think in the 400s sometime, made this statement: the world is a great book, of which they who never venture from home read only a page. And it is a great book. Particularly in this area here,
Oh my gosh.
called the Grand Circle, the Four Corners area, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. We did a lot of trips in that area. Yeah. In that World is a Great Book, there's a chapter on geology. And that's all right here. It's an open book. World history, it's fascinating. Oh, there's another little thing, interesting history in here. I consider myself a little bit of an authority on Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. You've heard of them?
Yes, sir.
They're from this area. Butch Cassidy was born and raised just a little bit south of here in Utah. And there are many of their escapades, the Hole in the Wall gang.
Where is the Hole in the Wall?
Well, there were 3 hideouts they had. The Hole in the Wall, by name, is up in central Wyoming.
Okay.
They had a place called Brown's Hole near the Utah, Wyoming, Colorado borders along the Green River. And then Robber's Roost which is straight east of here, a little ways out near Canyonlands National Park. Some caves that they lived in. The corral that they built to hold their horses in is still there.
Wow.
And I've taken people out there. We went out there and dialyzed out there one time.
Did you really?
There was a little spring came up out of the ground. I went out and got a sample of that, see if we could use it for dialysis, and we could. There was the nearest town nearby. Their water didn't pass. Too much aluminum in it. And but that spring did, and we dialyzed them there. It's where cattle would come to drink. We joked that the patients all started to moo after their dialysis there, but it went fine. But they got to see Robber's Roost, those caves where they would hide out in and so forth. So
That's tremendous.
yeah. So I would tell them the different stories, and there's some incredible stories about Butch Cassidy and some of his escapades, yeah. The movie followed it pretty closely to the actual history. But that was another thing that, for the tours in this area, just added to the interest in the folklore and so forth.
Do you think the trips, did they change the staff? Do you think the staff looked at dialysis in a different way?
Those trips did a lot for the staff because they could see sometimes they could do better for them there than they could with their medicines and hospitalizations and so forth. That was just a big tool in taking good care of dialysis patients. And they enjoyed it. They had as much fun as anybody did. They had to work, but they had to take a turn doing the dishes and all that sort of thing, but that was just a part of it all. We would sleep up on top of the houseboats, take our mattress off the bunks and put them up there.
Stars.
People from the big cities never knew there were so many stars. It was amazing to them. One night we had a lightning storm down there. It's incredible. I took some, I don't know if I still have them now, but some beautiful night pictures of the lightning striking here and there and so forth. All kinds of adventures, and a life jack at him and toss him in the lake. Oh, that was heavenly. Just loved it.
You said you had some people from abroad too.
Yes, we had people from England. We had one from Germany. We had one from Israel. Trying to think of Canada. We had several from Canada come and go on their trips. And they worked out all pretty good. One of the people from England, one time as we were leaving the area of Lake Powell and coming back, I stopped at a place and cut some sprigs off of a little plant that grows there. The pioneers in this area used to make tea. The Indians used to make a tea out of it called Brigham tea, and we had a couple from England, and the man's name was George. And I, whenever I'd stop there and say, I need somebody to come help me cut this to hold the bag, George jumped up and said, I'll do it. I said, nope, anybody but you. I said, we have a history of problems with Englishmen named George over tea matters. That got a good laugh, but made a little tea. I had it checked before, whether there was too much potassium or something in it, and they could all have a taste of it. And you can have a lot of fun out on trips like that.
I can only imagine. I mean, I've done a lot of trips, but it's because I've made them happen.
Yes, you have.
But it's to have this available to somebody who doesn't have a vision for that, and then to impart that vision on them so they can see themselves in a new way. I mean, that's we're missing that.
Well, I have one big regret right now. I'm sorry that you weren't a dialysis patient back then. I would have enjoyed having you along on a trip.
Yeah,
You're just the kind of a person who would have eaten it up.
Yeah.
You'd
Well,
have
it would have
loved
helped
it.
me a lot in those first years, for sure.
Yeah, It
I was
would
still
have.
trying to understand what it meant to need to use dialysis.
You know, getting along on dialysis is largely a matter of attitude. And he has it. He has the attitude in that.
Aside from some serious comorbidities that you
That's
can
right.
overcome.
You've got a lot of things like that, but still, it comes back to attitude. So many
It's
people
not-
can just give up.
You can't just turn on a switch to get it, but by bringing them out like on these trips, I think you can. There's a switch in there somewhere, and maybe these trips kind of were able to flip it for people.
Yeah. There are people who can thrive on it. Now, dialysis, unfortunately, kind of has a bad name
Oh, yeah.
nowadays. Oh, I don't want to go on dialysis. People die on dialysis. Well, they do, that's true. But people live on dialysis as well. And boy, some of them really live and live well and can be very happy. And there just needs to be more of that. Yeah. It needs to be, they need to learn the gospel of living and how to reliving and learning to live.
Yeah.
We all have problems. There's all kinds of problems. That's just another problem to be overcome.
Tell them something about Ryan Peak.
Ryan Peak, a young girl on dialysis, pretty cute little girl. Started on her while she was quite young. She came to be known as everybody's sweetheart. She went on just about every trip we ever did. She was like a daughter to me, and we just had a great, wonderful relationship. Yeah, from Salt Lake, and she was when we were up there at that ski resort, she could ski, downhill ski. She was good. She could water ski until she had a transplant that didn't work out, and something went wrong, and thereafter she was partly crippled. One of her legs went bad, had seizures and so forth, but she kept trying, and she always wanted to water ski again. We worked at it, and she finally did, a little ways.
So did you have
But
people with
unfortunately,
transplants come back on the trips even after they had been transplanted, or?
Once in a while, yes. There's somebody that just loved the trip so much.
Yeah.
They want to know if they could still go. And that reminds me of talking about water skiing. We had a lady from California. She was diabetes was the cause of her kidney failure and blindness. She was blind totally. And I had, unfortunately, a picture of her up on water skis.
Wow.
She didn't stay up long, but she got up. But also in Canyonlands National Park, from the main campground, there's a hill you have to go over on jeeps to get out into the, called Elephant Hill, and it's a steep one. One of the major sites that you can work out to is an overlook of the confluence of the Green and the Colorado River. You're 2,000 feet above it, looking down. We wanted to take the dialysis patients out there. It was a controversy in the state at that time. Local people wanted a road to be built out, a paved road out there to that confluence, so other people could get out to see it besides just the young and the healthy. Well, I squelched that whole proposal because I took these patients out, and I had that blind lady sitting beside me in my Jeep. She had a bar she could hold on to. And as we start up Elephant Hill, that's just back and back and back and bumps this way and lurches this way. Oh, wow, you know. Well, that's how blind people see. It's what they feel or smell or sense. And we go up over Oldfield and down and bumping this way, and in a certain place we back up a little ways to get around the turn. And then we're down going through a place where I said, just slowly push your hand outside the wall, and she did, and we were passing by a big rock cliff wall. And I said, I can touch the one on this side. Then we get to where it's dusty, and the dust comes up, and she can smell it. Some more bumps and other things, and we finally get out to where we have to get out and walk out to the
Promontory, yeah.
to the overlook. Hands on the shoulders of the person in front. Person who sees we had 2 blind people in that group. When somebody steps up, they know they have to step up. And we worked our way out there. And she goes out there, we let her get up right close to the rim, 2,000 feet above, and you can feel the breeze coming up, and you can hear the roar of Cataract Canyon way down there. You can hear a crow cawing way down on the bottom. And she knows that there's some big void there below her. She sees like the blind people see. I told this very story at a hearing on that proposal to build a road out there. I said, anybody can go out there, even a blind person. If you build a paved road out there, what's the difference between riding in the city street and riding out there to a blind person? You'll take it away from them. They didn't build the road. It's not built to this day. And it shouldn't be, because they would have destroyed more scenery than they would have opened up.
Yeah.
And so that one never got built. But anyway, all kinds of wonderful adventures and
Let's go
experiences with the
look at
dialysis
some pictures.
patients. Yes, let's, yeah.
We'll take a break because we need to reset the cameras, so you
Yeah.